Welcome to Sachs Realty's Tuesday Night Podcast, where we talk about anything and everything real estate. Each week, we deliver expert information enabling you to make better informed decisions while keeping more money in your pocket. If you're interested in real estate, this is your show. Hey guys, welcome to our Tuesday Night Live, and I am joined with Adam Taggart, a good friend of mine. He's been on the show. No stranger to the show. Adam, welcome.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be back here. Todd, I got to say, I love your audience. Whenever I come on here, I just get great, really useful feedback from folks, and they couldn't be nicer.
Yeah, well, I think we share a lot of the same audience, I think. And one of the things I want to talk about tonight is I don't feel that way, but sometimes people identify our channels as being like doom and gloom. And, you know, and it's kind of, I wish that people didn't think that, you know, because I like to think of it as we're just trying to bring things that aren't being discussed in, you know, mainstream media or headline news. I feel like we're just kind of talking about the things that no one wants to talk about. And the platform that we have allows us to do so. I mean, I'd love to see us talk about a thriving economy, and hopefully we'll get to that here one day. But I mean, we keep seeing things that are showing up that say otherwise. So, but I'm excited tonight to dive into another great discussion with you. And Adam, I do want to say one of the things that I really like best about having you on my show is that you're always the one that is sitting in the interviewer seat, and you're asking the questions, but not a lot of people get to hear directly from you, and I know they enjoy that. So I think that's one of the things that my audience loves best. But I have all of your show information and ways that people can follow you below in the show notes. But hopefully people that don't know who you are after tonight will be subscribing to your YouTube channel, your Substack, your X, and all that good stuff. So anyway, welcome, sir.
Well, thank you, and to the viewers, let me earn your support there, folks. So let me try to live up to what Todd just mentioned. But thanks, Todd, and let me preface all this by saying, folks, I don't consider myself to be an economics expert. I worked on Wall Street. I got my MBA from Stanford. I've been in the financial media world for a long time. So hopefully I know maybe a little bit more than the average bear here. But I created Thoughtful Money in my channel, I'm guessing for a lot of the same reasons that Todd did. In fact, I know a lot of the same reasons as you, Todd, because we've talked about it. Is to be a resource for the regular person, the regular investor who's just trying to build wealth and then hopefully prudently manage it, and more importantly, like not lose the wealth that they've built up. And when I started out this whole journey, honestly, I just wanted to create the resource that I, as an individual regular investor, wanted to have out there in the world. So like I said, I don't purport to be some grand expert in economics. If there's anything maybe I am at this point is maybe an expert of experts, because that's my day job. I have these long, in-depth interviews, very much like what you do, Todd, with some of the top minds in money in the markets. And so anyways, I just want to be super transparent with folks. There's no fancy PhD near my name. I don't have any economics white papers behind what I do. I'm just a regular guy like you trying to really tease out the practical insights that can help me grow wealth prudently, but also just not get destroyed along the way, hopefully.
Well, I think that's well said. Same with me. I mean, trying to interview a lot of the same people that we interview the same people. So a lot of what people will hear, and we pull different things out of them. But a lot of people are saying that we're not in very good shape with our economy. And there's a lot of conflicting evidence of that, whether it's made up, created, or not. I want to talk about some of those issues tonight with you, Adam, some sensitive issues. And I also want to talk about the real estate business because we're seeing a huge shift in the housing market. And it's
beginning to really pick up steam. Yeah, I agree.
Everything that we've been saying would happen, it is now happening. So prices are dropping like a rock. But out of all the people that you interview, Adam, I just want to kind of open up with a question, and it's a loaded question. But do you feel right now, with all the conversations that you have, that in many ways America is falling apart?
Um, I think to the spirit of your question, yes, in the sense that I think the trajectory is a degrading one. I don't, maybe I take a little bit issue with the words of falling apart, like that sort of just conjures, mindsets that, we're going to become like a failed state, within a year or two. And I don't live with that type of fear at the top of my list. But I do think that on a whole number of dimensions, many economic, but many cultural and otherwise, I think we are on this diminishing path where, on a generation by generation basis, in general, things are getting worse. And at the end of the day, like Todd, kind of to your intro, like I think I'm actually pretty optimistic about humanity, and where we'll go in the long run. But I really do try to be a realist and try to be pragmatic, and just where I see the data going and where I see things going, yeah, it makes me pretty pessimistic in the near to midterm. I kind of feel like, I know we've mentioned this before, but we'll probably follow the arc that Winston Churchill put out there when asked about Americans. He said, "I love them because you can always count on them to do the right thing after they've exhausted every other possible option." And I think that's kind of what we're going to do here as a society is we will continue this downward path until we hit some sort of rock bottom and say, look, there's got to be a better way to do this. And we'll start, making smarter decisions. And in a lot of ways, I think it's going to be returning maybe to values that we had in previous generations. Maybe exactly how we manifest those values will be different and customized to our current condition. But I do think the answers to a lot of what we face is returning to really the values of the past that pervaded throughout much of recorded history. Things like, live within your means. It's important that we. I'm a huge fan of capitalism and a huge fan of meritocracy. But at the same time, we have to avoid the tragedy of the commons. We have to have some sort of realization that, we're all in this together in the long arc of time. And so therefore, there are certain things that we want to preserve as, institutions or at least, common investments that we make sure good healthcare system, good education system, whatnot, right? So we want to be investing for the benefit of future generations, not just trying to use every resource we have today just for our own, personal experience. So, and again, these are all values that many societies over the course of the past hundreds, thousands of years have embraced, and we've been able to deviate from them, relatively recently, for things that generally are kind of unique in recent history. Things like we've got massive amounts of cheap energy available to us that lets us do things we couldn't do otherwise. We have fiat currency right now, right? That's not bound by any sort of fixed constraint. So it's, it leads it up to all sorts of abuse by those that are in power, right? And we've had episodes like this in history that in theory we should have learned from, right? But we're not right now. So, I guess I just want to I don't want to paint a hopeless picture like, oh, we're just doomed to failure. It's like, look, the answers in many cases to a better future lie in our past. And we just need to learn from history and then decide to change our behavior today. Like I said, probably going to be forced on us in most cases. But I do long arc, I'm still going to remain kind of optimistic for the human experience. But to your point, Todd, I think the spirit of your question, yes, I'm very concerned where we're headed. I think the people I talk to, it's kind of interesting. I'm going to make a quick little analogy. I wrote a book years and years ago. It's a very thin little book. I am almost embarrassed to call it a book, but it's all about helping people find their authentic career path in life. And the reason for that is you and I have talked about how our education system fails us in many different ways. It certainly fails in teaching people practical financial literacy, which is why your platform exists and my platform exists. That's why we created it. But it also really poorly prepares us for finding what our true work is in life. It throws a lot of information at you and just sort of expects that the clouds are going to magically appear and the sunlight's going to come down on you and you're going to have this epiphany and say, oh, I should be an X or a realtor or a doctor, a painter, whatever, right? And it rarely works that way. It's a minority of people who know very early on in life what they want to do. And so what happens is you end up, leaving high school, whether you decide to go to college or not, what you decide to major in if you go to college, where you decide to go work, is in large part kind of heavily influenced by your parents, by what your peers are doing, by even the economic cycle and what industries are doing well at that point in time and are hiring and whatnot. And because for most people, it's not a goal they set and they're laser pursuing that goal. They kind of just went along with the flow, with the tide, if you will. 10 years down the road, they find themselves kind of stuck in a career they don't like, but now they feel trapped, right? And at this point, they've got a house, they've got kids, whatever, right? They've got these commitments. They don't feel like they can take a risk and just start all over again, right? And the reason why I'm making this analogy is the data is pretty clear on this. It's something like 75% or 80% of people like actively, if they had the opportunity to do so and with enough of a low enough risk threshold, they would totally choose to do something other than they're currently doing, right? And I've found that if I go to a cocktail party and I meet somebody and I start asking them about their career, I only need to take like one or two scratches before the person's like, oh yeah, no, I'd totally be doing something different, if I had the chance, right? And I kind of feel like that's the case with the people that you and I interview, Todd. Now, some are much further down kind of the pessimist route and they'll come out guns blazing from the get-go. But a lot of people that I interview, especially the more conventional people, I've recently interviewed, a couple of people that have been former Fed economists or they're in much more sort of conventional positions that are quoted in the mainstream financial media and whatnot. They're not the people who out there on who've got their newsletter and can shoot whatever slings and arrows they want to. These are people who have like a lot of stakeholders to answer to, and so they have to be a bit judicious in how they pick their words. But I find when they come on, my first question, how's the economy doing? They generally say, well, it's kind of doing surprisingly well, that we just went through this pandemic and global shutdown and we didn't have a recession and, unemployment's still low. And then it's just like, I take one or two scratches and they're like, yeah, no, I'm really worried. And then oftentimes, you turn off the mic and then they're like, okay, look, this isn't what I couldn't say on air, but man, here's how I'm really worried, right? So it is interesting. I think we're at this place where I think most thinking people have very valid reasons for concerns. That doesn't necessarily mean they're a bear or a doomer, but I just think it means if you're a rational, data-driven person, there is enough smoke out there for you to say, okay, I can't say that the odds of fire are low enough that we don't need to worry.
Well, I like how you said that, because I certainly have enough people that say, okay, are we off now? Are we off the air?
Yeah.
You're not recording this anymore or whatever. And my grandmother used to always say, you don't have to say everything you think, you can, you can hold some things back to the imagination. But I agree. I think that a lot of the people that I think mainstream media is doing that. I mean, I can only imagine what goes on where they're like, man, I can't believe I just said that. Or I was, I'm reading a teleprompter and, oh my gosh, I don't believe any of this. I mean, I don't know that they would ever admit that or not, Adam. But it's some of the things, I mean, when you listen to it, it's like, it's two different tales, because it depends on where you are in the trenches to what you see or what you're being told. And a lot of people, but I do like what you said, because I find this very interesting, because what you started saying was that people end up spending careers in jobs that they can't stand. And sure, that's not going to make you very happy of a person. And I can get that. But I could see a lot of pessimism coming from that, and a lot of negativity because they hate their job that they're spending a lot of time with. And then they probably hate a lot of their life when they, hate's a strong word, but if you're not happy at work, chances are you may not be happy at home too. And I
I
do
think it's
think
very accurate for most people. Yeah.
yeah, we put a lot of pressure on our youth. We don't really teach them their God-given talents and skills as like, hey, there's a career out there for that if you actually like to do it. We always try and, put them in something. Sometimes we try as parents to even, put them in something that they shouldn't be in or regret. But I will just add this because we're growing here at Sachs Realty. Our staff is growing, which is a good thing. We're very happy about that. A lot of people
Sign
don't
of
realize.
well-deserved success. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir. A lot of people don't realize we've only been in business since 2017, though I've had a construction company. I mean, I've been self-employed for 35 years. Sachs Realty, I left a national brand, and started my own company, but we are growing. But I see what you're talking about in the resumes. So we get hundreds. I mean, we post a job and we get so many resumes, and it's really sad because number one, I mean, if you see where people have jumped around in their jobs, I mean, they go from one thing to something completely different. But not only that, but they're not even really good at putting resumes together. And what I'm finding out, Adam, is that they're unemployed and their resume says that they're still employed. So now my first question are you still at, oh, no. I haven't had an opportunity to update my resume. Bullshit. Okay. First of all, that's not true. If you're trying to get a job, you better have an accurate resume, but you don't want to hear that. Now, well, when did you lose your job? Well, I actually lost it in January. Okay. You're telling me from January to July, you haven't had an opportunity to update your resume? No, you're not getting hired with that kind of, laziness, number one. Or if you think you're BSing somebody, that's not going to happen. Update your resume unless you were fired today in the resume and you're interviewing today, which is okay, to be looking for a job right away. Let's just kind of take a step back a minute because you and I really haven't spoken in, I don't know, a month or so. And a lot has happened. And I don't want to get political tonight, but I just want to ask you a couple questions on your thoughts over the last several events. And I'm not picking sides, and I want to ask you a question about, first we'll start with the Trump, the attempted assassination. And I just want to kind of get and let me preface this by saying we have a poll out there right now. Okay. And Joe, pull the poll up and we can just kind of, so everybody's familiar with it, because we do want you to vote on it. But the biggest crisis in America today, the list, we don't have that many options here. I only have 4 options.
I know. I wish they'd make these YouTube polls. I wish they'd give you more than 4.
Exactly. So
like
the biggest crisis
on there, for example.
Yep. Homelessness, division, overall cost of living, and corruption. And these are the questions. I'm not trying to guide anybody into one or the other. I'm just curious as to what everybody's thoughts are, because I know our audience is very intelligent. But the division I want to talk about, because this is, and I'm not saying it's the biggest crisis in America, but I just have noticed that one of the things that we need more than anything else is unity. With any of the crisis that we have out there, we need unity to get through it, which means that we don't need to have these strong lines down the aisles where no one seems to get along with the other side of the aisle. It just appears that way. Where before, even though they would have differences, there wasn't what seems to be the animosity that there is today. But getting back to that, I'm just curious, as you watched what happened with the news, the media, the comments about what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, what are your thoughts on all of that?
In general, probably mostly. I've got some big thoughts that I'll get to in a second, but to my reaction when I heard the news, right, was sort of like a sad resignation. And I'll be honest, the thing that I was sad about was like, you know, uh, it didn't. I'm sad that it wasn't. I wasn't surprised by it. Right. In fact, if I'm being honest, I'm sad we haven't had more of these types of things sooner. And I'll even go back and give you a non-political example. Thank goodness it didn't happen. But I was amazed that we made it through the great financial crisis without somebody shooting a banker. Um, when you consider the society we have right now, and you combine, the pressures that are on the masses, um, you combine that with the unfairness in many ways of how our policies are being enacted. When you combine that with the mental health crisis we have in this country, um, uh, when you combine that with the generational loss of faith that the American contract has been broken, where millennials and certainly even more Gen Z don't feel like the American dream is available to them. When going back to Peter Atwater's comment that desperate people react desperately, there's a growing desperation out there, and I feared that would start manifesting with something extreme like that. And so again, I was sort of sad that like, yeah, you know what, I was hoping against hope that we wouldn't get there, but we're there now. And I think that look, there's a lot of reasons for that we can pick apart any way you like. But I think a big part of it is how our political system and its relationship with the media has embraced divisiveness. Right, that's sort of been the way in which they have mobilized their bases. And when they're fighting over the undecided middle, which is not that big anymore percentage-wise, they're really using divisiveness and demonization to try to say, how can you support that person? You're a racist or a sexist or whatever. If you do, you got to come over into you're a terrible person if you do. So come on over into our camp. And strategies like that just inflame and you pursue them for long enough. And, the mentally unstable, stressed out, most desperate of people, may take that as a green light to do something really extreme, like we just saw there. So, resigned sadness, I think, is the best way I can answer that question.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to, certainly, dwell on that tonight or, but I was kind of curious as to what your position was.
If I can, let me give you my big takeaway from it, which is, and not from the assassination, but more from what's happened with President Biden. And hopefully your viewers that know me know this well, but if I'm new to anybody watching, I chart a very nonpartisan course, a very apolitical course, both intentionally, because I find if you don't, then you start appealing to one type of viewer and alienating the other. And my job isn't to do that. My job is to try to educate everybody who's open to listening to what's happening with the economy. Secondly, it actually really is how I am. I'm about as close to a moderate independent as you can find in the world, I think. So I'm not being critical of the Democrats or Biden for any particular political reason here. I'm just trying to state what has happened, which is, if you go back in time, a month and a half ago, if you were to sit down with the Democratic Party and say, look, I'm here from the future, this is what happens over the next month and a half, they wouldn't believe you. They think you were crazy. And they would say, back then, I think they were saying, look, we still got a really good shot here. We got a candidate that listen to us. This guy's, totally more than up for the job. He's super capable. We just met with him yesterday. He was sharp as a tack, that type of stuff. And, the world more or less, bought into that. Once the debates happened, right, that was sort of the emperor has no clothes moment. And again, I'm not trying to beat up on Biden himself. What I'm trying to say is that it takes a long time for sentiment to shift. But when it does, it shifts on a dime, right? And all of a sudden, a whole host of things that weren't imaginable beforehand suddenly become imaginable, right? And we're now at a point where America, and largely the world, because the world, looks up to America, has had a real shock. Oh my gosh, something that we thought was one way and we're told was you know concretely one way turns out not to be that way at all. What else have we been told is fine that isn't fine? And I think that's
Yeah.
the really interesting question to be asking here, which is, does this open the door for sentiment to start shifting on other things, like the state of the economy, like the state of the job market, like the state of the housing market, right? Because, as you know more than I, Todd, people have been saying, what are you talking about, problem in the housing market? We're hitting, record median highs month after month. I mean, everything's fine, right? Um, you and I know that it's not, and I'm sure we'll talk a bit about that tonight. But now that faith has been shaken on one really important pillar, are some of these other ones going to start to shake too? And if so, then there could be a real cascade effect that ensues from here as people say, well, wait a minute, gosh, I'm not so cool about, I'm not feeling so good about the economy anymore. I'm not feeling good about my house prospects anymore. I'm not feeling good about my jobs prospects anymore. And that can really lead to big change much faster than most people are currently imagining right now.
Well, and and staying along the same narrative is really, being nonpartisan, and just to, because I know a lot of my viewers, and I'm sure yours as well. I mean, we have them on both sides of the aisle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because I mean, I don't believe, and I've always said, I think, there should be more than two parties. It shouldn't be a division of this way or that way. We have to learn to get along together, because no matter what happens, we need to make it through the next 4 years or 8 years, and come out, with some common sense, policy here. But what do you think? So, talking about, and then we'll just get off of politics. But do you think, with Biden stepping out of the race, I've heard a lot of people say, Kamala would have had a better chance had he just stepped out and put her in charge now. And I don't know what the process would be for
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing to happen. But then at least you could say, hey, guys, I've been running the country for, the last 3 months or 4 months or whenever it happens, right? Do you think that it was a good strategy to just step down and continue? Because I've heard a lot of people say, well, if he isn't okay, is he okay doing what he's doing right
Right, right.
now?
If he's not qualified to run a campaign, is he qualified to still run the country? Right.
Right.
Look, I'm not a political analyst. I think that question, obviously, super fair question, right? Would it improve Kamala's chances of getting elected, or I guess reelected, if she were made president now? Maybe. I mean, the logic, yeah, it's always, whoever's got the momentum, or whoever, what do they say? Possession's 9/10 of the law, right? If you can get it, it's harder to displace you. Um, uh, where was I going to go with this? Look, I mean, I live in California. I think Kamala's, got her work cut out for her, because right now there's the honeymoon of the Democrats saying, okay, phew, we were super worried there for a second that we were kind of rudderless. Now we've got somebody to rally around. Let's rally around it. She's raising a ton of money, and definitely there's some big constituencies that like her policies, and so we'll see. I predict. It's going to be a messy race. We'll put it that way. And again, folks, I'm not a political analyst. I think to answer your question, I think if I was putting myself, if I were a Democratic strategist, I think the right thing would have been for Biden a long time before to have made the decision that he was not going to run, and let the Democrats have an open primary and let them pick, the best, strongest candidate, let the people vote for that, rally around that. I think the way that this worked out, I think it's hard to feel good about it as a Democrat. They're making as much lemonade from the lemons they got as they can, and best of luck to them. But I think if you were trying to say, look, how can we best secure the presidency for a Democrat in 2024? nobody would have picked this playbook.
Yeah. And again, I mean, it's just nice to hear, I mean, you're a business person and just, and a contributor. So to, you know, to our, what we do, having a
Yeah.
show and interviewing people, and, we do have these thoughts. So it's just nice to hear, your opinion on these things.
Well, thanks. And real quick before we get off this topic, which I know isn't our usual fare, but two things I think may be worth for your audience to be aware of. So I do, in addition to interviewing, doing 3 full hour interviews a week with, a guest expert. I do a repeating hour and a half, 2 hour weekly market update with Lance Roberts, who's a personal money manager, a professional financial advisor. He's a portfolio manager. And, I asked Lance as we started going through all this stuff, right? But first with the debate and initially the questions as to whether Biden was going to stay in or not, right? And I asked him, how much, volatility do you expect in the market going forward from here, especially if they decide that they're going to replace Biden? And he said, not much. He said, it really doesn't matter to markets that much, kind of who's at the top of the ticket. Yes, they have different policies, and if somebody gets elected and the market, gets wind of those probabilities, it'll start shifting. But for the most cases, kind of for all the political drama that just absorbs the headlines and absorbs our attention, and sort of, as you were saying earlier, like, don't get distracted by just like the news of the day. He said it really doesn't matter that much to markets. And I got to say, it's largely been proven correct. When it was announced, Biden announced that he was stepping down. I don't remember what the market did that following Monday, but it was pretty much a nothing burger. I think the market went up the first trading day after Trump got shot at. So one thing I just want to let folks know is, take all these headlines with a grain of salt. They're going to be coming fast and furious as we get closer and closer to November, and the candidates, spend their war chests on advertising and things like that. Don't let what you see going on in the next couple of months politically get you so emotionally agitated that you start making really big, emotionally driven decisions around your portfolio. I'm not saying don't make changes if you think you have a better vision of where the puck is headed, but highly recommend you do that in as calculated and an emotionally free way as possible. And just to remind you, as a reminder, the markets generally don't react all that much to the political scene.
Well, you certainly interview a lot of people that say the market's going to crash.
Yeah,
you do.
Yeah, but that's not because of politics necessarily.
Right, no.
Politics
I know.
are a component.
That's true. That's a good point. That's a good point. I do too. So, I mean, it's, it certainly is, I know in the real estate business, we don't see things like crash overnight. I think it is possible that you could just wake up one morning and be like, oh my gosh, what just happened to the stock market? And, and then as people are literally, selling off, you can watch that happen in real time where, in the housing market, you just see a seller sitting there with their house with no activity, which, by the way, Adam, we are seeing a ton of. Price reductions are crazy, and I do want to talk about the housing market, but just to add to that, I'm amazed at how many emails I'm getting from people that are telling me their story. I'm grateful, but we'll talk a little bit more about it. But yeah, it's happening. People are struggling to pay their mortgages for real, and people are losing their houses, getting ready to just turn in the keys and move out for real.
Well, we'll talk about all this because I want to hear your data, and I'll share some of the data that I'm hearing. But I think a key thing for folks to really appreciate, I think, at this time is how interconnected everything is, right? So, if the market does go through a correction at some point, obviously that creates a negative wealth effect that then manifests in housing, right? And if there's enough of a slowdown in the economy, probably, which would be what would trigger a market correction, that's highly likely to then be corroborated with layoffs, which then, of course, really impact the housing market as well, because people are losing their incomes and some percentage of them are going to be forced to sell, right? So, think of like, a floor full of dominoes, and you really got to be careful or thoughtful about, okay, if this domino falls, which other ones are likely to get impacted by that?
Well, as I said earlier, I mean, we're hiring, and I'm seeing these resumes coming through and talking with people that are unemployed. So I think that's a big, that's big right now.
Do we want to start there? I mean, there's lots to
Well,
talk
let's
about
sure.
in the
Yeah, let's
in the
talk
labor
about it.
market.
Yeah,
Okay.
I actually have. I do want before we do that, I do want to
Yeah.
pull something up because I have a website here, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and interestingly enough here, and we'll get to the chart here, but it says this is gross domestic product by state and personal income by state. This is the first quarter of 24. I feel like they're kind of like in the real estate business, like backward looking data.
Yeah.
But if we look at the map of percentage of GDP growth, it's easy to see what states are, positive and negative. But I really just want to look at this one if we're going to talk about income or jobs. This is a personal income percentage change at annual rate.
Okay.
And I was kind of really surprised at this. So it says that nationwide, it's about a 7% increase in wage growth from last year to this year as of the end of first quarter. I guess, Adam, the first question I have for you on that is, do you believe that?
No. Well, I was going to say, I wish you'd sent this to me beforehand so I could dig into it. Because, yeah, I'm like you. At the top of my head, I'm like, okay, that's definitely not really mapping to what I'm hearing. But yeah, I'd love to compare that to the inflation change at the same time too, and see. I'm assuming these are nominal numbers here.
They are.
Um, what's interesting, and I think you're probably going to go here, is in many cases the highest, where we see the highest percentile growth, tends to be in the states that are really beginning to suffer right now from a real estate standpoint. So in some ways that doesn't jive. Yeah, and I just don't know how they calculate this data off the top of my head. So I guess I'm going to take a little bit of a pass, except to agree with you that this doesn't really mesh with what I'm expecting to see from a bunch of other data points.
You're in California. Do you think that the state on average has seen a 8.2% growth from last year to this year?
No, I do not. But I can tell you that I think the cost of living out here in California has grown by more than that. So, even if California did, I don't think it would be enough to make up for the growth in cost of living. And I don't believe the 8.2% increase here is representative of the average Californian.
I pull this site up a lot. Last week I did as well. I just want to kind of go over the last week of layoffs. This daily jobs cut or dailyjobcuts.com site seems to cover it pretty well. Wells Fargo shows up a lot on this, but we see another 130 jobs lost. Wells Fargo in Las Vegas. Some of these, our audience may know these companies. Some you may not, but John Deere confirms an additional 134 layoffs.
Yeah, and let me just note for folks that you're going through a daily log there. Like
Correct.
This isn't, you're not talking about the month. We're just talking the past couple of days. Nike, John Deere, Caterpillar.
4,300 layoffs. 1,600 was expected. 4,300 is what they have, is what's happened so far this year. It's crazy. That's a lot of people.
And look, I mean, you're putting your finger on the area that I've been looking at most closely over the past year, because folks, whether you're familiar with Michael Kantrowitz's hope framework or not, hope is an acronym that stands for or represents the pathway that the economy follows when it's either going into or same pathway coming out of a recession. And it's an acronym. H is for housing, O is for orders or sales, P is for profits, E is for employment. And basically, you think of them as four dominoes, and the H domino always falls first, down to the E domino when you're going into recession, and then it goes the same way coming out. And so it's really important to watch the E, because so goes the E, so goes the economy, right? And the numbers for housing and orders and profits over the past 2 years or so have in general worsened, and it sometimes got really sick and then got a little better. But the E has really hung in there pretty solidly as the bulwark against the economy and recession. There's a lot of the data around the employment space that I think is increasingly suspect. So we kind of have to ask ourselves two questions. One is, what is the true state of the employment market? Can we get better data on it? And then secondly, if we can, what is it telling us about where we are with recession odds? And for a long time now, there's been, I think, a feeling for those that track the jobs numbers closely of, who you're going to believe, us or your lying eyes, right? Where you listen to the jobs data coming out of the BLS and the other government sources, and they're telling you nothing but sunny skies. But you're looking outside and you're seeing the raindrops fall, and you're like, wait a minute, either I'm taking crazy pills or they're not giving me the full story, right? So, when we look at the amount of layoffs, when we look at the number of warn notices that are being given right now, and for those that don't know what a warn notice is, if you're a company above a certain size, you're required to give notice before you do layoffs at scale. Those have exploded this year. Obviously, your layoff tracker shows how many companies are laying people off right now. It's definitely material. For the past year plus, you've seen all sorts of headlines of either hiring freezes or companies announcing layoffs. The quits ratio, the quits number has come back down to pre-pandemic levels. So I'll try to actually find the chart and pull it up here. But both quits, which is a sign of employee confidence that they can go leave and get a better job, that exploded during COVID when everybody was feeling flush from stimulus checks, and companies were scrambling to hire people back and having to offer really outsized compensation packages. Now that's all gone. And people are not quitting anymore because they're now in the like, hey, just please don't fire me, please don't lay me off mode, right? Hires for companies have plummeted, at least in the private sector. They're still riding high in the government sector. So the government's trying to kind of, as you might imagine, trying to keep things looking as good as possible before we get to the election. But there's just so many different data sets out there when you dig, like I said earlier, just a little bit of scratching right below the headline numbers, where you start realizing, oh dear God, there's a lot of horrible things going on here. As we've talked about before, negative growth over the past year in full-time jobs. It's all coming from part-time jobs, and that's not a sign of a good economy. It's generally a sign of people having to work multiple side gigs just to be able to make ends meet, right? Virtually, on a net basis, jobs are going to non-native born Americans, right? Just to meet all these signs of weakness in the economy. I interviewed a couple of high-level, and I think importantly, mainstream economists recently. I interviewed Anna Wong, who's the chief economist at Bloomberg Economics. She right now has the highest forecast for unemployment for the end of the year. She's got it at 4.5%. And that, from an economist standpoint, that's really sticking your neck out there saying, I don't think things are going to be feeling very good. That's it right there, exactly. And she said that, look, in a traditional recession, employment rate can go a lot higher, go 5, 6, 7%. She said at 4.5%, it's going to feel like a recession to most people. So I think, in the not too distant future, Todd, the odds aren't bad that we're not going to be talking in hypotheticals. The debate will be over. People will be like, yeah, this hurts. This is feeling like a recession. I just recorded today, it hasn't even come out, it won't come out until this Sunday, an interview with Claudia Somm. And I'm sure you've heard of the Somm rule, Todd, which is basically like a quick and dirty metric that Claudia developed, that's been widely adopted now, that it's kind of like the canary in the coal mine, that when the canary slumps over, you're like, okay, we're in recession right now. We might not have felt it all, but the economy officially has entered one. We all better, assume the crash position. And essentially, when it gets, I'm trying to remember exactly, but I think you take the 3-month moving average of the unemployment rate, and if at any point that is 50 basis points higher than the lowest point over the past 12 months, that's when the Somm rule gets triggered. We're not there yet, but we're close. We're at 43 basis points. And Claudia is quick to point out, hey, we've been up in this range before, and then it's pulled back. So don't assume that we're immediately going into recession. But when I scratch around it with her for a little bit, she's like, hey, look, momentum-wise, trajectory-wise, and all the other things below the hood I'm worried about would not surprise me at all if that thing gets triggered pretty soon, right? So when you have mainstream economists like that, issuing visible concern over where things are going to be with the unemployment rate, I think that's when you really take notice. And for your producer, if he's able to pull this up quickly, great. If not, I might be able to find it. But it might be instructive just to pull up a rate of the unemployment, a chart of the unemployment rate from Fred. If you just type in unemployment rate Fred, this should hopefully pop up. I think we might have talked about this in the past, Todd, but the reason why you want to watch the unemployment rate so closely is, you'll see it right here. So the gray vertical bars there are recessions. And you'll see preceding every recession, the unemployment rate comes down from its height. It gets nice and quiet, right? Nice and stable. And then once it starts turning up, bam, it just spikes, right? So it's this kind of thing that's just totally under control until it just starts showing a little bit of unhappiness. And then in general, bang, it skyrockets up into a recession. You can't guarantee that's going to happen this time, but if you look at this chart, look what's happening at the very end of the chart there. You're seeing it's turning up here, right? So if we follow the pattern of history, and this chart goes back, 50 years, if we follow the pattern of history, we are right on the precipice of the unemployment rate shooting dramatically higher from here. And as I said earlier, that's the gateway to recession, and all the other things that people are worried about become a lot more possible.
Leave that up for a second, Joe, if you would, please. A couple of things. A lot's changed on what they consider full-time jobs, too. I mean, now it's like 34 hours a week, not 40 hours a week. So you're almost at a complete entire day. So when they're counting these full-time jobs, I don't know anybody that has a full-time job at 34 hours. Maybe our, nurses, maybe, firefighters, people that work long days that need, more of a break in between. I get that, but on average 34-hour work week, no, that doesn't happen. The other thing is that when we're looking at unemployment rates, we're not counting people after they've been unemployed for a year. I don't think that drops off. So that's another metric that really isn't accurate. I mean, when we look at it, there are a lot of people that are unemployed. But when we look at this chart, and I'm so glad you said that, Adam, because it's something that I never realized looking at this chart, how fast it goes up. You're exactly right. I mean, we're looking at almost vertical lines that when the layoffs start to happen, it's almost a vertical line that it happens that fast. And a couple of things to unpack. You had said that during the pandemic boom, and it was a boom because a lot of people were spending a lot of money, and which required a lot of employees that weren't more employees than we needed to ramp up so quickly to handle demands. And people were giving bonuses, and they were really desperate to get people. So they were recruiting from other companies. They were paying bonuses for them to stay because they were being recruited. But our biggest employer in America is still small businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is, and you have to understand, and when we're talking about this as the public at large, you have to understand you're talking to two small business people right now.
Mm-hmm.
You're listening to them. Okay. Here's what really
Solopreneur
happens
right here.
But here's what happens when you have employees. You take your check and stick it in the drawer.
True.
And you wait until it gets really, really bad because you want to be hopeful. So you don't want to let your good people go. So you're holding on to them and holding on to them until finally you're just like you've extended the line. I've done it myself. You extend a line. Well, if things aren't better by August 1st, I'm going to have to start cutting some people. Well, if things aren't better by August 15th, those accounts don't come in, the customers don't come in, I'm going to have to cut some people. If by September 1st, you keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. Then all of a sudden it breaks and you're just like, I'm sorry, but I have to let you go. I haven't cashed 8 of my paychecks and I can't pay yours. And, and I think that that's what we have to be mindful for. So for you all that are listening out there that have a job, work that job like it's, it could end tomorrow. Be valuable, because if your employer is going through a hard time, a lot of what we're seeing in these job cuts are top level, not lower level, top level jobs. They're like, yeah, you got to go. Right. So, and they're the ones that it's going to have the biggest impact on the economy. It's like a snowball, and certainly then in the housing market.
So, a number of things. I agree 1,000% with everything that you've said. There's the old Hemingway quote: "How'd you go broke gradually, than all at once?" Right. That is how we enter recession usually, right? Collectively as a nation. And so you have to be prepared for the sense that it's this kind of thing that just accelerates almost from out of nowhere, right? When you sort of start seeing the signs, it just gets much faster, much quicker from there. And so you don't have a lot of time to adjust before perhaps you might be in the crosshairs where your job is at risk. I was just writing this note. I've written a guide I called it the Layoff Survival Guide. And it's just it's not that long, folks. But it gives you a bunch of steps if you work for a paycheck, or if you work for somebody else, gives you a bunch of steps that you should consider taking today while you still have your job. And then it's got a bunch of steps that if you were to go into work and get surprised with a pink slip, it says, okay, these are steps that you should definitely be taking today. I am going to do my best to remember after I get off here with you, Todd, to put it up on my website. So go to thoughtfulmoney.com/layoffs, and I'll try to have the guide there. If for some reason you're not finding it there, just use the contact button on the site to say, hey, Adam, can you send it to me? And I will.
Yeah, and if you text it to me, I'll make sure Joe puts it in pins it in the comments too.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we can do that for
you. Yeah, I think we're at a time right now where if you are, again, working for a paycheck, if you don't have ultimate control over whether your job's going to be there tomorrow or not, this is where you want to be, preparing while the sun is still shining, right? But you mentioned a couple other really important things. So when I was talking to Claudia, and I really feel for her, I would not want to be an economist right now. One, because there's so much dust that's still in the air, right? There's both from stuff that's happening right now, but there still are a lot of distortive effects rippling through the system from the extraordinary measures that we took during the pandemic. That makes seeing clearly hard. And it's compounded, I think, too, by, this is a little conspiracy-ish, but I think it does go on, right? If you're the incumbent administration, in the last year, at least leading up to the election, you're doing everything you can to put as much lipstick on the pig, to make it look as good as possible. And I've seen the official polling data, which maps to your informal one that you just did, Todd, which is by far and away, it's the state of the economy and inflation. that is the number one issue that people say they're going to vote. They're going to use as their voting guide when they go into the voting booths in November, right? So if you're sitting in the office, you got to try to make the economy look as good as you possibly can, right? So just smear as much lipstick as you can on that pig, right? So you have that. You've got doctored data and you've got distorted data, which makes it really hard to really know where we are on especially in the labor market right now. And that leads me to think that things are, whatever the official numbers are, it's probably a lot worse than what they're telling us, just for those two reasons. Secondly, as you said, COVID actually really did change behavior. And one of the big things it did for companies is, they laid everybody off, right? Because they were told we're shutting down the economy. Then all the stimulus hit and they realized, oh, we got to hire everybody back. And it was much more costly and harder to do that than they thought it was going to be. People were starting to get checks in the mail. They were having forbearance programs. They were having other companies start throwing money at them, right? So we had this great resignation, right? Where a bunch of older workers saw their portfolios recover and said, hey, I think I'm just done working. I think I'll just retire early, right? And then you had other people, working age, who just had better options or didn't have to go back to work just yet. So anyways, generals always fight the last war, and companies, I think, were like, wow, we don't want to go through that again if we don't have to. So they've been hoarding labor since then. And to what you said earlier there, Todd, once things start getting tighter, you as an entrepreneur get real creative to try to keep things going, keep the status quo going for as long as you can. But what happens is, and this goes back to my point about sentiment, once your sentiment shifts, once you say, you know what, there's no way to keep the balloon from crashing in the ground, given what I'm doing right now, I got to resort to extreme measures. I just got to start throwing as much as I can out of this balloon, right? And that's when all of a sudden, all those people who were hoarded and protected and the entrepreneur sacrificed as much as they could, all of a sudden, you just have to start lopping off limbs, just letting go of entire departments, and so that's, again, why we transition from something that looks very quiet or quiescent to something that looks very, very chaotic very quickly. And that always catches people by surprise. And man, folks, if there's one thing you take from this video, is hopefully us just telling you, just minimize your odds of getting surprised by what might happen from here. Take defensive measures now. And hey, I'd love to be wrong. Right. And if you take defensive measures now and nothing really happens, for the next couple of years, we avoid recession somehow, hey, no harm, no foul. Right. But if you don't take those measures and then you go into work, in a week, in a month, a quarter, whatever, and you get surprised by a pink slip, it could dramatically change your prospects.
Staying on that, topic, those that follow me know I've been in the construction business my entire adult career. And just today, I had painters, a company, a drywaller, and an insulation company call me looking for work. When they're picking up the phone calling somebody that hasn't built a house since 2017, I think I've rehabbed a couple since then. But ever since I started my brokerage, I haven't rehabbed or built a house. For one, it's a risky business to be in right now because people are now starting to realize that what I've been saying is happening. Mm-hmm. Prices are coming down. But I just want to, these are three trades. I also spoke with someone today who worked for a company that was a home improvement company that had a lot of employees, and they just laid off a huge part of their staff. This is Maryland, where we're insulated to most of what's happening all over the country, right? I mean, we have a lot of money here. We have a lot of people, and when we start to see the spending stop on the construction side, on the renovation side, building additions, building pools, fences, they're pulling back. That's telling me a bigger story. And a lot of who we have here are government employees. I I mean, they're feeling it. Their job may be more secure than working for someone like me, but at the same point, they're feeling the crunch on the cost of living, right? But I want to just pull up here real quick because I want to tell you how ridiculous things have gotten. And if you guys are in the construction business, you know what I'm talking about. And this is local here, Home Depot, local, California, where you are at, it's going to be more money. There's two things I want to show you right now. It's almost like diesel and gasoline. Diesel fuel is less refined than gasoline. The reason why you pay more for diesel fuel, in my opinion, is because they know you need it to get goods and services trucked around and shipped around. That's a more expensive fuel. It's a higher, that's where they are baking in cost of products. But I want to show you guys something here. These 2 stacks of drywall are 4 foot by 10 foot sheets of drywall. The one on the left side is 1/2 inch drywall. That's what people put in their house when they're building a house. The one on the right side is the same exact size, but only the thickness is 5/8. That's called fire rock. So 5/8 drywall is fire rock. You use it for fire separation. When we do commercial buildings like what I'm in right now, sometimes the code will even say that you have to have double 5/8 depending on how close you are to another building to give a fire separation should the TV monitors behind me catch on fire. Right behind me, that's a double 5/8 firewall. Between floors are double 5/8. My point is here, it's less money for a better product because they know people don't need that. They're not going to put 5/8 fire rock if they don't need to. So the more commonly used product is more expensive. Now here's what I want to get out. The labor. I just had somebody told me they paid to hang 100 sheets in an apartment. They built out an apartment, 100 sheets of drywall, which, by the way, a 3-person crew can hang in a day, was $75 a sheet to hang and finish. The last house I built in 2017, I was paying $8 to hang and $10 to finish.
My God.
Okay. Now, everybody's entitled to make a profit. That's not my point here. My point is that the building product prices have gone up so much that in itself is going to crush home prices. Because this is just one aspect of a home, drywall, right? But when things need to be repaired, people can't afford it, so they can't pay that much for the house, the existing home, because if they need to go in and do upgrades and updates and stuff like that, that's going to help to suppress home prices, in my opinion. A lot of people think the exact opposite. They go, well, home prices aren't going to come down because building materials are going up.
Yeah, the input costs put a floor on the price of the house.
Yeah, well, guess what? Renovate a kitchen and find out how much it costs and see if, number one, your house isn't worth that. And that's the key. You have to look at and say, if I put money in a house, does it result in me being able to charge more money for it? And now we're getting to the point where we're going, no. You could spend $150,000 in improvements and your house not even be worth, to cover that. You may be negative $100,000 just to sell it. You have to put the kitchen in or do the kitchen and bath renovations to make somebody buy it. But now you're not getting more money for your house because of it. The prices are coming down.
So great point. And I think at a very high level, what you're saying, which I totally agree with, is that we could be on the precipice. And in housing, things move more slowly than the markets, and also everything's local. So aware I'm talking in a generality here. But we could be on the precipice of an entirely different housing market than the country has become accustomed to over the past 30 years, right? So you and I even talked in the past about how the cost of home ownership have rocketed higher, with inflation, right? So yeah, prices have gone up, but also so has property taxes and insurance and cost of maintenance and repair and stuff like that, right? Um, so, you know, one could argue that by itself should start pulling prices down, because it's almost like increasing the discount rate of the asset. But we have we've got a base of homeowners who are used to the housing market being bidding wars, right? With all cash buyers. It sells for something above listing, right? And in many cases, no contingencies, are super flexible on that stuff, right? Imagine a market where nobody wants to buy at list price. They absolutely want you to take care of everything that's not good with the house before you sell it, right? And so all these people who are married to their current Zestimate and expecting not to have to do anything but hand the keys to somebody may find that the reality is very, very different. So I think that's just one big light bulb to try to turn on people's heads. I recently interviewed Melody Wright, who I know you've had on your channel often for good reason. She's great. So I did sort of an impromptu out of schedule interview with her over this past weekend, because I was talking to her last week, and she had just been looking at the most recent default data, delinquency data, and the jump in 30-day mortgage delinquencies. Her expertise is on the mortgage side. She worked for a mortgage lender during the Great Financial Crisis, and her specific task back then was to deal with defaults and help people kind of get out from under loans they were defaulting on. So she said her eyebrows hit the ceiling because the latest month-on-month 30-day delinquency rate jumped by 19%. Now, I'm not in her business. That sounded high to me, but I said, what's like a normal baseline? And she said, you know what? I get really worried when that's like 4% month over month. So the fact that it's 19% is just shocking. And the fact that we're seeing this today, like we've only seen numbers kind of like that during like April of 2020, right? Which is when COVID was shutting the world down. And then again, in the depths of the GFC. And so in those two environments, yeah, it makes sense to see something like this. But to see it now, right, when we had a surprise to the upside GDP growth for Q2, when the stock market's near all-time highs, when we just hit a new average home price for June from the Case-Shiller data, when unemployment is still relatively low at only 4.1%, right? Technically, right now, everything's fine, but we're starting to see crisis level numbers in the data, and she's very clear to say, hey, look, this initial data point doesn't a trend yet make, and we got to watch all this stuff. But of course, this isn't the only thing she's seeing that's making her concerned. My point is, I think we're going to talk more about this because I think you have even more data here, Todd. But things are shifting and moving really quickly, and it's the last thing I'll say before I hand the baton back to you. What I took away from Melody, which was really important, is okay. So we have a market now where a record percentage of aspiring home buyers have said, can't do it, can't afford it, housing's too unaffordable for me, right? So we've had a large and growing percentage of the aspiring home buyer population say, I'm out, right? What Melody is now saying is she's now seeing a growing amount of existing homeowners, right? So with the aspirants tapping out of the market, I think on average, homeowners have been kind of like, well, I feel bad for them, but I'm sitting here on my 3 or 4% mortgage and I'm doing okay and I'll be fine in the long run. Well, now we're seeing a growing number of them that's becoming material say, you know what, I can't afford to live in the house I currently live in. I can't afford the house I currently live in, and I'm going to have to start defaulting on my mortgage or doing a quick sale and just getting what I can and downsizing to something. And I think that's new. I think that's a really important thing to realize, that if that indeed is happening, and Melody says it's increasing, I'm going to signs that it is, that really does change the game in the housing market here, because it's not just about the aspirants anymore. It's about the people actually living in these units.
Adam, over 1 million people during the the pandemic were in some type of, I say 1 million people, 1 million households were involved in some type of forbearance, modification, remodification. We were going, a lot of people know, we were headed into a recession in 2019. This was before,
before COVID.
Yep. So a lot of people, if you buy a house today, a brand new home, and you move into that home and you live without making any repairs, that's the benefit of moving into, no improvements, no repairs. The benefit of moving into a new home is, on average, we say you don't have to spend any money for about 7 years. That's kind of like some people are harder on a house than others. You can go into some houses that they've lived in for 2 years and go, holy cow, what in the world did you do to this house? Right? I mean, you destroyed it. But most people get about 7 years. Now, we're talking about brand new everything. Now, let's take the person that bought a house 7 years ago that was an existing home that didn't have brand new everything. Mm-hmm. This is where we're seeing the delinquencies showing up the most. Because when people buy the house, they buy as much house as they can, and they don't plan on anything breaking. Mm-hmm. They don't have any money in the bank, zero reserves, no fund. They have credit cards, and if they're lucky, they still have room to squeeze stuff on them. And what happens is now we are 4 years beyond, almost 5 years beyond 2019, when we were headed into a recession, when people did not have disposable income. Now we could say, but the stock market's been at all-time highs. We could say that, looking at that chart, oh, well, employees are getting raises. They should not be complaining because they're making plenty of money. Wrong. That's all bullshit. What's happening is that inflation has skyrocketed. We're not making enough money to pay for the rate of inflation. And people are struggling. That's really what's happening. And for the 1 million people that had some kind of forbearance, or that are still struggling, or that are spending 5 years or 7 years in a home without making a mortgage payment because they don't want to see foreclosures in Washington, not now, maybe not ever, because it looks really bad, because we have to admit that at that point, people are really struggling like we think they are, or like they know they are, but now they really know it because their house is imploding around them and it's leaking. So we're right at that cusp where it's not a surprise. You can drive around the neighborhoods now and you can see distress. You're starting to see gutters falling off of houses, decks rotted. I'm looking at them. I'm showing properties to people where you have to be careful now walking out on the deck because the boards are rotted, right? Where things are really, really starting to show distress.
Because a growing number of households, I used to have a stat on this, but just can't afford the maintenance, right? Exactly.
They can't afford the maintenance. So now if you can't afford the maintenance, or if you can't afford the mortgage payment, you're not maintaining the home. So now what's happening is I'm getting the emails. I just got an email. It takes me a couple of weeks to get back to people because I get a lot of them. But I've just read one from a couple of weeks ago where I'm going to reply to them tomorrow, and they're talking about, hey, I haven't kept my house up. I can't afford it. I need to sell. Help. What do you recommend? They're not in the state of Maryland. I can help them if they're here firsthand. I have to refer them to people outside of Maryland, and I may not even have anybody in their area, in their city. We do have a broker network, but we don't have all areas covered. The point is I've already looked into what Zillow says as this estimate, and they're in trouble. They're in trouble based on what they owe and what needs to be done to the house. I don't know. It's not going to be a great email. But my point is, and when you get back to the trend of the buying trend, we have to remember, we got to break it down. A third of the buyers were first-time buyers over the last 5, 6, 7 years. That's been a pretty consistent number. I think last year it dropped down lower than it has in many years with first-time buyers because of the affordability. Now, sales have dropped down lower as well, but even the percentage of sales is lower now with first-time buyers because they're tapped out. But a third have been investors. They can't buy at today's prices. So you have 2/3 of the buyers in the marketplace, in the hottest market, that aren't interested in your inventory.
Right.
They're not interested in your house at the
just
price.
to add to that too, the investors, and we can talk more about this in a moment, but generally they're looked at as the smart money, right? And if the smart money has backed away from the table, that should tell you something about today's prices.
Yeah, 100%.
So you're hitting a really important point, which is I think the average person that doesn't follow this stuff all that closely, and this is probably the type of person that's more likely to say to us, "Oh, you guys are just so bearish. Come on, you're just inventing ways to be pessimistic, right? What are you talking about? We just hit a new, average sale price for an existing home last month. Like, what are you talking about, right?" And this is where you really have to look under the hood, right? You can't just rely on the headline data. To your point,
you have to be honest.
Well,
you have to be in
honest,
the
but
trenches, and you have to be honest.
Yeah, and you just have to exert some critical thinking here, right? You just can't swallow one data point and assume that reflects the entire market. So, as you mentioned earlier, you just mentioned, transactions have cratered, right? So I think I don't know how far you have to go back in history to get to as few transactions we have now, but it's a long time, right? And so basically, so many people can't afford anymore. Like you said, the third that used to be a third were first time buyers, right? Now that's shrinking now, right? So we have a much higher concentration of buyers now, who are the folks that can still buy, which are the affluent, right? So it's the affluent or the children of affluent people who are getting parent help in buying their house, right? So basically you have the houses that the affluent can buy are selling right now. So that's been holding the average prices up, right? So it's not a sign of a healthy market. It's just a sign of a really narrow market. And we're beginning to see signs that even the affluent are beginning to struggle here. So if you look at luxury brands, a lot of them have been having, really kind of horrific guidance that they've been issuing. Their stocks have been getting hit. But probably even more notably, and I've mentioned this on my channel a couple of times recently, if you look at RV sales, like Winnebago, their stock just got hit I think about 2 months or so ago, maybe not quite 2 months ago, but where they came out with their Q2 earnings and their forecast for the year ahead. And RV sales have been trending down ever since the height of COVID, because everybody was buying an RV during COVID. But now it's really getting clear that these things are starting to pile up, and the buyers just aren't there anymore. Similarly, Polaris the other week, similar disappointment for the market. I think its stock dropped like 20% overnight, and it's largely because people aren't buying ATVs and jet skis, which is what Polaris sells. So the toys of the upper middle class or lower upper class, those are reflecting that these folks can't afford them anymore, right? So we're now getting to the point where even the affluent, who have been keeping the average sale price artificially high, are starting to tap out too, right? So again, many signs we're in the late stages of this. So if all you're doing is looking at that average sale price, you're making a very different conclusion than somebody who's looking at the market data more closely.
That's a good point. Yeah. I want to bring up something, Adam, and this hurts me to say too. I mean, I'm embarrassed to say this, but kind of getting back to the housing market, we're seeing where home inventory is staying on the market for longer. What I'm finding is that in a lot of cases, I can't even get a hold of their agents. And it just a little off topic from what you were just talking about, but it just popped into my head, and because I was thinking about it, I have a tour tomorrow with buyers that I sold their house. They moved in with family, and now they're ready to buy. And we sold at the top of the market. They've been, listening to the show, and they're good students. And now we're looking at some inventory that has been sitting on the market for 45, 50, 70 days that has had multiple price reductions. But while you were talking, I was thinking I haven't heard back from 2 of the 3 agents that I left messages for today. And this is something that is continuing. And I want to say, and this is even embarrassing, and I guess we're going to have to really do a reevaluation on our own network, because I was just thinking that over the last 2 weeks, I've reached out to 5 agents in our own network across the country, and they never called me back. And I have leads for them.
And
So
do you think they turned in their licenses? Like they just haven't done?
No. I don't think so at all. I think what's happening is, I think that a lot of what we're really seeing is, who are the true professionals in the industry that are, committed to serving their clients. When you have a listing and you're not calling an agent back that has a question about your listing that's been sitting on the market for 45 or 60 days, you got a problem, okay?
Yeah.
And you're bigger than that. Your seller has a bigger problem, and that's that they need to fire you because you're not responding. And sometimes I've made several calls, and so what I'm telling sellers, hey, look, if your house is on the market and your agent, the only time you talk to them is when they're saying price reduction, have one of your friends call them from a number that they don't know and see how long it takes for them to call them back.
That's a great
Because
point.
one of the problems why your house may not be selling is because your agent sucks.
Very true. And again, so I was talking about earlier, the agents, the musculature that they've developed in their career is order taker, right? Oh, you want to bid over asking value? Great, right? I mean, you don't have, and look, I'm painting with a broad brush here, and I'm not trying to insult.
Hey, it's worse than that. It's, you want me to write an offer for you? Well, how much over are you going to offer them? Because I'm not going to write it worse than
if you're just coming in at list price, buddy, I'm not interested, right?
It's not a very broad brush.
Yeah. So I saw this when it's a long story that I'll make really short here, but I joined Yahoo. I used to work for Yahoo. I worked there for about 10 years. And I ended up being a vice president there, but the day I started, it was lower in the totem pole, and I joined on the first day of layoffs that Yahoo had in its history. And it's surreal time. Got a lot of dirty looks as people were getting called into the conference room and being told they were fired. And they're like, "Who's this new guy? Why does he get to stay?" And you just showed up. I've been here for forever, right? Anyways, some interesting stories from that time we can talk about later. But I remember that very soon after they hired me, they replaced the CEO. And one of the first things he had to do was basically fire the entire sales force. And it was because the sales force they'd only known the phones ringing off the hook. They actually didn't know how to sell, right? They just hadn't yet had a bad time in the industry where they had to do that. And of course, this was a new industry, and once the bloom was off the rose, you really had to convince people why they should be pulling money from the tried and true advertising channels and putting it on this new online internet thing, right? So he had to totally replace the entire sales force because they just didn't have the right muscles for the job that was needed. And I think we may have a very good analog here, given where housing's headed. And I 1,000% agree with you. And I'm talking my book here a little bit because on my channel, I try to connect people with good financial resources and always say, look, unless you've got a really good track record, demonstrated track record of success as a DIY investor, which not a high percentage of people have, your job should not be trying to determine what's the next best asset for your portfolio. It should be determining who's the right next best team member to bring onto your financial team so you can leverage their expertise. And absolutely, when you're buying or selling what's likely to be one of the biggest assets you'll ever have to deal with, get yourself a good professional.
I couldn't agree. I guess the question is going to be for us is, what's going to happen to real estate agents, and whether.
Well, that's where I thought you were going, and maybe I'll just ask the question here, right? Where it says there's a lot of real estate. There's the Pareto principle, right? Where 80-20 rule, and I believe real estate's not immune from this, where it's the top 20% of realtors are really good. They're the guys you really want to work with. They get a lot of deal flow. They've got all the experience, and then the bottom 80%. Is either the not so great or it's kind of the dilettantes. Yeah, I might sell a house a couple times a year, but I'm not hitting the pavement every morning. I don't need to work that much because it's either a side gig for me or I just want a lifestyle type of thing, right? So there's a lot. That 80% is likely to get pretty decimated if they're probably getting decimated now. I mean, sales volume is so low. A lot of these guys are probably starving, right, Todd?
They're
and
dropping.
Where I'm going with this, I'll let you answer, but it's really important to remember that that industries support expansive orbits of workers, and housing is for sure a really important one, right? So as the housing industry does well or suffers, that impacts, yes, the sales agents, but it also impacts the construction business and all the people that do the building, right? Carpenters, the electricians, all that stuff, and it also supports the banks and the mortgage lenders, and it also supports the diners that are selling the breakfast to the construction workers that come in every day, right? There's this whole ecosystem that gets impacted. Are you already beginning to see that ecosystem get impacted just by the collapse in transactions that we're seeing right now? Because we're not even talking yet about the negative wealth effect that's going to change people's psyche if there's a big market correction, or people's behavior mostly selling if they lose their job, if we actually go into layoffs.
Yeah, I mean, we're absolutely seeing it. Housing is about 30 to 35% of GDP if you include housing-related services and costs. So we're definitely starting to see the effect of this sales meltdown. It's not going to just pick back up again. A lot of people think, and that's why, I hate to say it, ignorance is bliss. I mean, I don't, I'm not discrediting, because I could be wrong. I have said this multiple times. If something happens a year from now, whatever, and we don't really see this thing unfold and it's not headed in the direction that I've been talking about, I'll be the first one to say, hey, I was wrong. That the first time in history we didn't see a downturn. I mean, we're already seeing it. We're already seeing the downturn. We're already seeing where, buyers are getting inspections, for crying out loud. They weren't having those for 2 years, almost 3 years. They were waiving their inspection rate. Just the fact that they're getting them now and the sellers are fine with it and that they're fixing things is a huge change and a market crash. If people think that, well, they're going to drop, the Fed's going to drop the rates, treasuries are going to, drop, and it's going to affect a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. We're going to see 4% mortgage rates. Let me tell you something. I don't see that happening. I don't have a crystal ball. If the Fed does quantitative easing and starts buying mortgage-backed securities, that's the only time we saw 4% mortgage rates in the history of mortgages, is when the Fed started buying these mortgage-backed securities after the GFC. Prior to that, they weren't in mortgages. Right. So what has really happened is FHA is the new subprime. Right. Yeah. I mean, they're backing all these mortgages. Right. And they're coming out with all these programs, blah, 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 blah. The bottom line is the delinquencies are rising. People are buying houses with no money down. They have no idea what home ownership is about. And now we're going to find out about it. And if they drop rates tomorrow, we're not going to see home sales take off the way that they did. First
I'm
of
so
all,
glad you said that. Yeah, because I was gonna hit this point because we hear that all the time, right? Oh, we just have to, once the Fed starts cutting rates, everything's going to be fine, right?
it's not. It's not. It's not. It's not changing anything of what we just talked about on home repair costs. It's not going to drop property taxes. It's not going to drop insurance costs. It's not going to drop HOA fees. It's not going to drop, when you need to fix something in your house and put a new roof on it. It is not going to make a big difference. We've burned that bridge. We went there for too long, and now we're going to suffer the consequences of it. And and that I stand by.
Hey, talking to Melody, I asked her, what's the likelihood of us getting back at some point to the 4% or less mortgage, and she said, I'm not sure we're going to see that again in our lifetimes. And of course, that's a big statement, and I'm sure she would say, look, there's a chance she could be proven wrong. But her gut sort of tells her, like, almost like you were saying, that was a rare moment in history, and we very well may never see those conditions again. Do you agree?
And I don't put anything past the government. Like I said, if they come out with, or the Federal Reserve, let's say that, because they're not technically the government, but if they start manipulating and buying mortgage-backed securities and start doing some of the things that they did before, could we have a period of it? I mean, maybe. I mean, could we see 4.5%, 5%? I would hope not. But could they do it? Yeah, they could certainly do it. The bottom line is, though, where do we go from here? Are we all of a sudden going to see? I mean, I think if we get 5.5% or 6% mortgage rates, they're great rates. But the real question is going to be, how do we repair the damage that's already been done? Because we're not going to avoid the job losses. We're not going to avoid the layoffs. We're not going to avoid the next round of automation eliminating a lot of our jobs. We're not going. These are things we're not going to avoid, Adam. And that compounded with the price, the asset price, we have to see deflation, and that's going to be a very painful process.
I know, and that's. I mean, this is a bigger issue than just housing, right? I mean, when people sort of ask me, hey, what would you do, right, if you ran the system? And I would be highly unpopular. Because I would essentially let natural market forces have their way, right? Which would basically result in much lower housing prices, much lower financial asset prices. There'd be a lot of debt defaults in the system, and it would be a real rough couple of years. I'm not sugarcoating it. But we would then hopefully stabilize at a much more sustainable, sane, and fair baseline that we could then build the future of our economy on, right? And so I agree with what you said earlier, Todd, is it really does come down to what is the government going to do, because it is not going to idly stand by and let that happen, right? I do think we'll probably see some differences in approach between a Trump and a Biden administration. But it is interesting because there's such a host of shoes that will probably start dropping really fast. But there's a parade of shoes that are going to be, I think are going to be falling or dropping, in the relatively near future due to the lag effects, right? As we increase the cost of debt on a highly leveraged economy, we didn't get the recession that everybody thought we were going to get in 2023. And I think largely the reason for that was because we had put so much stimulus in the system, and we still continue to on the fiscal side, that it has delayed things, but it's just all making the reckoning going to be even more painful when it does arrive. You can't negate market forces forever. You can just delay them. So we have that. Then we have some midterm stuff, like you mentioned, like AI, right? Like, okay, whatever correction we get through, we still have challenges like, hey, is AI going to basically mean we need X% less workers in the workforce? And what the hell are those people going to do? Right? We're going to have big social issues around that. And then it's not that far in the calendar if we project ahead to what you and I have talked about in past videos, Todd, which is, we're at the tail end of 10,000 baby boomers hitting retirement age every day. We're about 10, 15 years away from 10,000 of them going to the nursing home or dying, right? Sorry, yeah, 10, there's 10,000 a day, but it over 20 plus years that number gets real big. So we're going to be having that again, 10,000 going to the nursing home or dying a day.
Or how about just cutting back their expenses, not wanting to have a 4,500 or 5,000 square foot house or bigger.
Right, and that'll happen on an increasing basis as they approach the time I'm talking about. But when they do, right, we're going to have this 20-year period of 10,000 boomers checking out on a daily basis, right? That is going to be, it's going to place a huge amount of sustained downward selling prices in the real estate market and in equity markets too, by the way. But I know that this topic has come up briefly over the past decade or so, but everyone still thinks about it's way down in the future, right? But that I've not heard anybody answer that question sufficiently yet, right?
Well, I can tell you that their kids don't want their houses, so I can just here's what, and this really gets to me, Adam. People say, well, they have so much equity in their house, whatever, and their kids are going to take their house. Their kids don't want to spend what you do in your tax, property tax bill, your utility bill, your lawn maintenance bill, all these are big bills. So essentially, you're going to attempt to give the house to your kid that can't afford it.
Right.
So they
may not want it, to your point, right?
They don't want it.
If you have more than one kid, in most cases, they're like, well, look, it's too awkward to figure out who's going to get the house. So the fair thing is just to sell it and divide the cash evenly. Right?
And you know what happens on those estate sales when it gets to that point? The kids want their money, right? You get, one in California, one in, Illinois, one in Maryland. And then we come in and we're like, they're like, we want the house sold now. We want our money. So what happens is they end up dumping it because when you divide the profits by 3, another $50,000 isn't that big a deal. They just want their money. So
right. So multiply that by 10,000 homes a day for 20 years. It really begs the question: why would you stretch when homes are basically more unaffordable than they've ever been?
And this question right here is to you.
Yeah, why would you stretch to get into that house today with a 30-year mortgage when in 10, 12, 15 years you're going to be in this period we're talking about, right?
Exactly.
So, okay, I do see the question here from Ukbay Nguyen. If finances become difficult, could it delay retirement for boomers? I don't know if you're talking about sort of national finances, kind of the big macro environment, or you're talking personal finances, but I think the answer is the same in both. Absolutely, it'll delay retirement for boomers. I actually feel really empathetic for retirees, for people in the boomer cohort today, because if you look at the average number of retirement savings for people that are 65 and older, Todd, it's sad. It's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars that for most people, if they've got 15 plus 20, hoping to live 20 more years, 15 years, like it's not going to afford a high quality of life if that's all they got. And that's the average retirement savings number. When you go to the median, it's sickening, right? There you're talking like, I don't have the data in front of me, but it's like $130,000, right? Whatever. It's like, it's not enough that's going to keep you going for, a decade and a half, 2 decades at any quality of life. So what that means is basically there's a smaller cohort that has a lot of money and they're going to be fine in their retirement, right? But then you've got a huge amount that really has very little or nothing. I've definitely seen stats that have shown that basically half of people in the boomer generation have no retirement savings. Whether that's accurate, I think it's in the right ballpark, and that's just sickening, right? I mean, so many people that
that's why they're still working at 75 and 80 years old.
Well, exactly. We're going to see more and more of that, right? When you go into the Walmart or the movie theater or whatever, and you're having a 84-year-old or older, they're helping you on the other side, where your heart just goes out to them that you should really be enjoying these last years.
How about the
So,
second part of this? And can it prolong unemployment for the younger cohorts?
well, absolutely. Again, and that's that's one of my fears right now is I, I think the housing, the employment market is sicker than most people realize here. Certainly, what we're being told by our government officials, Jerome Powell, et cetera. And I think we're probably not that far away from really learning how bad it is. Maybe they can keep things covered up until the election, but I'd be surprised if going into 2025, this isn't one of those things where sentiment shifts, where people are like, whoa, wait a minute, this is way worse than we thought it was, right? Um, and I'd be surprised if we don't go into recession. So obviously that means a lot of layoffs for everybody. Um, my heart really goes out to the younger generations right now because it's become so much more expensive on a relative basis just to live, right? Just to deal with the general cost of living, and most of them, like I said earlier, have kind of given up hope on the American dream. Um, so uh, so you marry that to a recession, right? Where generally it's the youngest first with least experience that get let go first, and then of course nobody's hiring, right? So you get these young people that are kind of out of work for a long period of time, right when it's important to be building your foundational skill set. And then if in that time period AI is continuing to make leaps and bounds and advancement, the job market that opens back up at the end of this recession may require a lot fewer workers than it did before. I'm painting a relatively bearish picture there. I hope it's not that bad, but yeah, I do think I do think that's a real concern. And I've got kids that are college age. One just graduated college, one's going in, and you know their cohorts and my daughter who just graduated from Cal Poly, which is a STEM school out here in California, a very highly respected one. I was shocked at how hard it was for the kids that she went to school with to land jobs. I think eventually most of them kind of did, but it was really hard. And a lot of them are working in jobs that aren't necessarily related to their majors that they were hoping to get employed in. And again,
Yes,
this is in good times with
I
bright,
see
shiny
that.
kids with really attractive majors, right?
Yeah.
You go to people you're talking about, Todd, that don't know how to write a resume well or haven't been at working much since
And
graduating or
and these
whatever.
are college graduates too.
Yeah,
A
and
lot of
just the
them.
fact that they're college graduates. So there could be a big problem. And the last thing I'll say before I go to this next question, um, but we have to be really careful with AI. I think because it builds upon a problem we were already creating with outsourcing and automation and robotics, where we've provided for the past 20 plus years um, a very big economic malincentive to corporations to try to replace human talent wherever possible with technology, because it's been getting increasingly more expensive to employ humans. Right. In California, a really great recent example is the mandated dramatic increase in minimum wage for fast food workers. The
I have a
restaurants just
chart
couldn't
on that,
absorb it. So
Joe.
what's happening? They're paying people higher wages, but fewer people. They've laid off a ton of people, right? So you had a lot of people who would have much preferred to be earning what they were making before and still have a job versus have a few people make 20 plus bucks an hour, but be out of work themselves, right?
Yeah, the cost of employment. We got a chart on that, Joe. Maybe you could pull it up.
Pull it up if
Yeah,
you
it's a good
can.
point.
Yeah, because if you add in, healthcare and OSHA and all the other things that get, workers' comp, all the things that get put on top of the entrepreneur, like you, Todd, right? It's really expensive to hire people, especially because there's also uncertainty. They might turn out to not be good workers, right? You don't know until they're on the job, and then you're worried about, am I exposing myself to a lawsuit if I let go somebody and they come back and they want to invent some reason why it was a toxic workplace, and there's just all that risk, right? So um, the point is AI just makes it even easier for companies to employ fewer humans. And I'm mentioning all this because there is something that's been known for centuries in economics. It's called technological displacement, and it basically says that if you can replace a human with technology, in general, you should. It's the more efficient use of your capital, right? Like if you can, you know, buy a cotton gin, and rather than have field workers, you have the cotton gin. Great, you should do that, right? What you got to be careful about is the rate at which you displace the human labor. If you displace it at a faster rate than you're finding additional productive use for that labor, you end up creating a social problem where the cost is higher than the gains from the new technology. And I think that is, to my, from what I can see right now, I don't see what the plan is for all the people that might get displaced by AI, except, people are like, well, then we'll have, whatever it is, universal basic income, right? UBI, right? And it's just like, no, that doesn't work. It never works. We basically just did that experiment with COVID, where we paid a lot of people to not work, and we created lots of problems for ourselves. We should be learning these lessons from the past, but I feel like we're kind of blindly heading into a much bigger social worker crisis.
We have amnesia. We don't look at the past.
And I think willful blindness, selective amnesia. We are literally covering our eyes and ears around this.
Exactly. Well, I know, Joe, and if you're looking for that chart, it was when we were talking with Danielle. It was on the, I think it was the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. It was talking about the cost of employment and how it went way down during the GFC. We'll see if he can pull it up. I think it's the next one down from that. It's like a bar graph. Scroll down. I don't know. Just go ahead and take it off until you find it. It's fine. Just, yeah.
All right.
There it is.
I'd love to.
Nope,
there we go.
That's not it.
Nope. Okay. Well, I'd love to see the chart when you find it.
Yeah, if he can produce it.
I'd love to have some more data to support it.
Yeah, so Charles says, my neighbor down the street has had her house on the market for at least 60 days, trying to sell it for $840,000, 1,200 square feet on a busy street in California. Thanks, Charles, for contributing to that. We'll see. 60 days, I'd say it's a long time. Austin says, please have Brian from the channel Clear Value Tax on your Tuesday. He's been consistently adamant that housing is still rising as a whole. Would be interesting to hear you question him. I don't know if somebody knows him and could get me his team contact information. We'd love to have him on.
It should be easy. I know of his channel. He gets a lot of views.
Okay.
You should be able to find a contact for him. And I think it's a good idea, just to Austin's part, is, there are a couple of housing bulls out there. I've had a few people, say, hey, get so-and-so on your channel. The thing is, when I look at their channels, I don't feel like they're being as inclusive of the data. To me, it feels like they're, and again, I'm happy to host a debate between a melody type and a housing bull type, if I can find the right person for that. But I do worry with the channels I've checked out. It does generally seem to be like the person is almost sort of pushing an agenda, as opposed to just having a different interpretation of the same facts.
I agree. All right, let's see here. I know we have a couple more. I want to pull up a couple articles too, in support of what you were saying earlier about people not making ends meet. So Charles, again, by the way, the governor is planning on increasing those $20 an hour wages by another 3% by next month. The bill allows him to do so.
Yeah. What is it? No idea is so bad it can't be made worse. And look, I get it. I'm not trying to be dismissive at all to how hard it is to live in California. Again, I live in Northern California on $20 an hour. It's rough. It's very rough. But I always look at things with the lens of what is economically sustainable, right? If you can come up with a way to grow your economy well over time, everybody benefits, right? If you just come in and make fiat decisions because you want to score some political points, but you're introducing increasing unsustainability in the system, I just always think that's the wrong choice.
Yeah. This isn't the chart that I was referring to, but it says the same thing. Essentially, it basically shows where, and to your point with, or both of our points when we're talking about AI, a lot of people they want to say, well, AI will create jobs, it won't eliminate jobs. Well, I can tell you, if you're thinking that AI won't eliminate jobs, you may really need to reconsider what you're talking about, and know that businesses have been looking for ways to cut labor costs forever. It's the biggest expense that they have on their income statement. And, most businesses, some businesses can't eliminate labor. If you're in the construction business like me, unless you're 3D printing a house, which right now is not the most practical thing in the world to do, good luck customizing that and giving somebody a nice fireplace surround, and hardwood floors and, nice millwork and things like that. You're going to be using labor and materials to, to have something like that. If you just want four walls and a box, yeah, you may be able to 3D print that away. But let's look here for a minute. And this is what I was getting at. Right before the GFC, we saw that some of the cost of labor for private sector, and look how it changed when people were without a job and we had 10.5% unemployment. Mm-hmm. And look at, as the next several years, climbing out of the 10-year recession of the GFC. And by the way, people that all your housing bears or bulls rather that want to challenge the fact that home prices don't go down. It was almost, in a lot of cases, 10 years later when someone bought at the peak of 2006 before they could actually sell their house for what they paid for it in 2006. Mm-hmm. So if all the people that couldn't afford to pay their mortgages that lost their homes, but not to mention that, just people that needed to sell their house because the average time somebody spends in a house is like 7 years nationally. It climbed up to 9 years. But when we're talking about, if it takes 10 years to get to the price that you bought it from at the peak, the last peak before the GFC, think of those people that dumped their houses and lost tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars because they had to sell their house. But look here we go after the GFC, we climbed up out of it. And now look at where the costs are for employers to have employees. We are higher now to house an employee in your business than we were back in 2006 at the peak of the boom, the highest boom we've ever seen in the housing market prior to most recently. 2006 was the highest. It was the most highest peak, the biggest bubble that ever burst post World War II in the housing market. Shocked everybody. For the first time, home prices declined and went down in value. We had depreciation in housing. Okay. Now, for all the people that say that was a once in a lifetime, look at where we are back at again. All it takes is for these employers to figure out how to get back to 2010 costs of employment. And there are going to be so many jobs that are going to be wiped out. As a result, what's going to help that? AI, the next round of automation. Adam, any thoughts on that?
I just that, I think you're preaching to the choir here, right? Where, so this is a chart in year-over-year growth. So we're back up to the same sort of nosebleed, growth rates that we saw leading into the GFC, as you were saying. And remember too, it's not just increase in labor costs this time, right? It's in the cost of everything for these companies, all the input costs, all the insurance, all the taxes, all the regulations. So, the cost burden that they're experiencing, the cost increase that they're experiencing is greater than what we're just seeing here in this chart, is what I'm trying to say. So that incentive to say, dear God, let me find ways to reduce my exposure to these costs is even higher now, right? And the technology is developing at a phenomenally accelerating rate, AI specifically. If it comes anywhere close to what the proponents are the sunshine they're selling us right now is, it's got the potential to displace an awful lot of people. And look, there's a lot of, I think, there's a lot of froth in the AI story right now, especially when it comes to the markets. And we don't have time to get into that right now, Todd, but happy to talk about that at some other point in time. Or folks, come to my channel and watch the interview I did with Fred Hickey about a little over a month ago, and it'll really give you the full details there.
And by the way, I love your channel. I mean, for those that have not checked out Adam's channel, you're not subscribed, cruise over, subscribe to his channel. I mean, you really, you have great guests, but your questions are outstanding and you pull it out of them. I mean, I listen to a lot of YouTubers and YouTube channels and that interview a lot of the people that you do, but you have a way of getting some really unique information out of your guests. And so I love your show.
You're very kind. And again, my friend, Mutual Appreciation Society. And I'll finish my little diatribe here, but one of the key things about AI is that they haven't found like the killer app for it yet. Like we're still waiting for that transformative thing that everybody says, yes, that's making my life so much better. Or the corporations are saying, oh my God, yeah, that's just totally changed the game for us. But what we can see with the applications to date are they definitely are in the let's get rid of labor camp. And, especially around like companies with big, customer service desks and stuff like that. So even the imperfect baby, version of AI is a job destroyer. So when it really comes into its own, how much more will it be? I don't know, but I wouldn't want to bet against it.
Adam, if you think about the things that have changed, let's see, my best friend for years and years and years, he's passed now, but he worked for a company where he sold letterhead and envelopes. You remember how many envelopes and letterheads companies used to buy and print? This is before the printer, right? I mean, if you just think about the print shops, we have a couple new agents that just started. We give them business cards. We give them a nice business card. I almost fell over when I saw the bill for the business cards and I called the company up and I'm like, what? Like, why are these business cards so expensive? And they said, because nobody's using business cards anymore. So you think, everything is...
Their economies of scale are gone. They don't have it anymore, right? Yeah.
It's all technology. It is eliminating a lot of jobs. And, and we can say that we don't make anything here in the U.S., very little. We don't know how to fix stuff, right? I always tell people that are young people when I'm talking to them and I'm mentoring to them, I say, look, go into the trades. Man, let me tell you, no one knows how to fix anything. You'll make a lot of money. I know we have some more questions.
Yeah, as you're looking there, I'll just say, my advice to kids, because look, I'm a huge fan of the trades. And actually one of my dream interviews is getting Mike Rowe to come on the program. I haven't had success in that yet, but I'll keep knocking on that door. But what I tell people, and I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, I'd written a book about helping people find their careers. One of the best things you can do early on in your life is really zero in on how you're going to create value, right? It might be with your hands, it might be with your mind, right? There's many different ways to do it, but that's how you demand a premium in the marketplace, right? So really zeroing in on a way of how am I going to create value? And in general, how do I map that to my natural abilities, my acquired skills, and my interests, right? If you can determine that, then you're setting yourself up for a great life because you're highly likely to outperform because you're playing all your different strengths. And even if the money doesn't come as much as you thought it would, you're living your days with purpose that's meaningful to you, right? You get up in the morning, you're excited to do what you're going to do. You feel good about what you did when the end of the day comes around. And really, that's what living life is. I mean, Todd, we talk about money a lot. Money is a means to an end. It's not the end in itself.
It certainly isn't. Here's a good comment. Matthew, a longtime follower of our channel, and as an auctioneer and real estate broker, and this is a real estate broker, guys, we have seen a 48% decline year over year in sales at auction and prices down nearly 40%. Res real estate prices down 5 to 8% and sales down 6%. month to month. So it is crazy that at auction the prices that people were paying for housing was crazy.
Look at that.
All
He's
right.
saying prices down nearly
Oh, sorry.
40%. I mean, that's not
Yep.
too far away from half, right?
Yep. Let's look at, and a lot of stuff that's sold at auction too is distressed. So here's somebody says
Hmm.
that I would argue that the main problem currently is the level of financial illiteracy, and that people do not have the habit of saving. They have the habit of spending. Hey, let's look at that poll one more time before we jump off.
Okay.
Uh,
By the
uh,
way, Faith is a shared viewer. I recognize the name
yeah,
from my channel too. So, hey, Faith. And I agree with you. That's a huge issue. That's why
yeah.
I think Todd, big part of why Todd and I do what we do.
Yep, and here we go. We have our poll, almost 2,000 votes. Biggest crisis in America today: homelessness, division, overall cost of living, and corruption. And the two big ones here that you all have voted are overall cost of living, number one, and corruption, number two. Of those two, some believe they go hand in hand.
Well, it's interesting because, as I said, I've been looking at the official poll data, and it's really clear that overall cost of living is far ahead of everything else. But on the official poll questionnaire, of course, they don't ask for corruption.
Yeah.
I think if they did, we'd have results there that are more like this. Yeah.
Right. No, leave it to me. All right. So here, Charlton, another longtime follower of our channel. Okay, question for Adam Taggart. Will Fed reduce prime rate in September and October, and by how much?
Okay, Charlton, I'm going to cop out a little bit and say, to get the answer to this question, um, subscribe to my newsletter, because right after every Jerome Powell press conference following the release of the FOMC minutes, um, I do a live reaction video with Axel Merck, who is he runs a number of different funds, but has a former regional Fed president on his board. He's had a lot of connections to the Fed over his career. So we kind of deconstruct in real time, what we think the Fed just said and what it means, and then he shares his outlook for the road ahead. Quick correction too. The next two potential opportunities for the Fed to hike rates are in September and November, not October. So I don't know is the answer. I wouldn't be shocked if the Fed cut in September. I think it wouldn't cut more than just a quarter point. I think it would be dipping its toe in the water. There's a number of analysts who don't think the Fed will, for one of two reasons. Some are in the camp that it should stay higher for longer and really make sure inflation's dead before it decides to do anything, because technically the Fed knows how to re-stimulate the economy better than they know how to contain inflation. So better to make sure the inflation dragon is indeed slain before you take your sword out of it. But on the other hand, the other folks that think the Fed might not do it say that, when the Fed says it's independent, but it doesn't want to be seen as being guilty of influencing political outcomes. And a lot of people think that September is too close to the election to make a policy change, that could be seen as being in favor of the existing administration, right? And Trump, I think a week ago, very publicly said to Jerome Powell, he had in the past said he would fire Powell if he got back in office. He's now changed his tune and said, no, Powell, I'm going to let him stay. But he for sure shouldn't muck around with policy before the election, right? So sort of delivering a little bit of a warning shot to Powell, like, hey, if you make a policy change, I'm coming after you if I win, right? Now, technically, that shouldn't influence Powell's thinking because he's supposed to be independent, but who knows? The market absolutely thinks the Fed is going to cut rates in September. I haven't looked recently, but the last time I looked, I think it was like 93.5% or something like that. That being said, I just challenge you, don't put a ton of faith in those market projections, because the market has been predicting rate cuts since the beginning of 2023. It's been locked in this year and a half game of chicken with the Fed, saying, hey, we believe you're going to pivot at the next meeting. And Powell has had to dash the market's hopes again and again and again and again. Will he do so this time? TBD. I think the odds are, I hate to do this. I think they're probably 50-50 at this point, but I reserve the right to change my opinion after doing the live reaction tomorrow with Axel.
Well, I mean, you just brought up some very valid points. He hasn't yet, despite the fact that multiple rate cuts were baked in and expected. And he has said publicly on multiple occasions that that there is no political pressure in their decision. So very interesting to hear. I was leaning more towards we would see a quarter of a percentage change because it would not do a whole lot, but may give some hope of some things to come. I think people are trying to hold on to some kind of a hope. A quarter of a point is nothing.
Nothing.
So it would, it's a, yeah, I mean, I might agree with you 50-50.
Thanks. Hey, Joe, real quick, while we're talking next, can you bring up just go to the Google, type in federal funds rate, Fred, and pull that up?
And while he's doing that, Cameron here is saying that, and also a very long time follower of our channel, $20 for a Big Mac in California.
Yeah, which is
crazy.
McDonald's has been getting walloped recently as they've been sharing that their earnings outcome their earnings outlook is disappointed the street, and largely because they're citing reduced customer demand. We are at the point where we're beginning to see
going automated.
Yeah. But we are beginning to see consumers basically saying, I can't afford to eat at McDonald's anymore, right? And when you see that happen, that is definitely a sign that your consumer is struggling, because that's supposed to be the affordable choice, probably the unhealthy choice, but affordable. So, Joe, thanks for bringing this up. I just wanted to, in fully answering the previous question, 50-50, they're going to do a quarter point in September. Maybe they'll cut once or twice more in this year. I think probability is high that history is going to repeat itself. And if you look across this data series here, which is like 80 years or so, maybe 75 years, what you see is the Fed hikes interest rates. It then plateaus for some period of time. Then the recession hits, and the Fed realizes, I hiked too much. I held it too high for too long. And then the Fed panic cuts into the recession, right? And if you look at where we are right now, on the very far right of this graph, same deal. Very aggressive rate hike. We've been plateauing. I don't see any compelling reason why history is going to be different this time.
Mm-hmm. Well, so they've been coming down. If you just look
how much they cut this year, I think 2025, if indeed a recession hits, is going to be the year of the panic cut scramble for the Fed. So we'll see lots and lots of cuts in 2025, but not for good reasons.
No, we're a debtor's nation, right? I mean, that's we everybody's in debt. I want to get into this because I do have a couple articles I want to pull up, but Nancy here is saying many people are living in their cars and in the woods. And I want to just pull this up here. The Washington Post just published an article. I don't know if you've seen this yet, Adam. More of Americans homeless are clocking into jobs each day. Homelessness, already at a record high last year, appears to be worsening among workers. And a couple more points in this article here that was yesterday. They are plumbers and casino supervisors, pizzeria managers, and factory workers. They deliver groceries, sell eyeglasses, and unload trucks at Amazon. And they're the new unlikely face of homelessness. Working Americans with decent paying jobs who simply can't afford a place to live. And, some facts here: Southeast Texas up 61% from a year ago. This is homelessness. Rhode Island up 35%. Northeast Tennessee up 20%. And Tulsa, for example, where homelessness rose 26% this year, lack of affordable housing ranked as the top reason people said they were homeless, beating out mental health struggles or job loss. I mean, this is crazy. Look at this. Here's the chart. You can see homelessness. And this chart only goes back, by the way, to January. But you can see higher homelessness than when people were losing their houses during the GFC.
Right, and that's January of 2023, I think, was
Correct.
the data point. Yeah.
Yeah, it's over a year old. More cities and states, too, are citing homelessness as among their most pressing concerns. In California, Adam, where you are, where nearly 70% of the people without homes live outside. And now Governor Gavin Newsom on Thursday ordered officials to clear homeless encampments on state land, saying it's time to move with urgency.
Hmm.
What are they going to do with them, Adam?
Well, so huge problem. And look, to talk about the mismanagement of the homelessness situation in California would take another 2+ hours, Todd. So I'll try not to rat hole on that. I think I just want to say, like, this really cuts to the heart why I do what I do. And Todd, I think same for you, which is, to your first question about, is America falling apart? And I said, well, we're on this downward trajectory, right? Um, if we continue on this trajectory that we're currently on, and I don't see what's going to change that trajectory anytime in kind of where my headlights are shining ahead. At some point, I think it's not a financial crisis that we need to worry about. It's a social one, right? Where we have such an accelerating wealth divide in this country. And the people on the wrong side of that divide are not just not as well off as the others. It's that they are exponentially, in many cases, worse off, right? To the point of this article where, you're a manager of a business, right? Manager of a restaurant or something like that, right? Where you have a position of some seniority. You're not just necessarily an entry level, line cook or something. And you can't afford a roof over your head, right? Your populace is only going to put up with that for a certain amount of time, and then understandably is going to push back and say, wait, you know what? We've hit our breaking point. The system is just not working for us. Our only option at this point is to change the system. And while I root for reform of the system, I would like it to be an intelligent, peaceful, nonviolent reform, if at all possible, right? But the longer we go on this trajectory, the more concerned I get. And so, what I'm trying to do is try to keep as many people as possible on the right side of that line and help them avoid the vortex that's trying to pull them over to the other side. I've got an awful lot of sympathy for the large and fast multiplying population of people that are getting sucked into the gravity well of economic and financial distress, because it's like a black hole. The further you get sucked in, the harder and harder it is to ever climb out of that, right? And losing your home then puts you at risk of all the other reasons why people remain homeless, right? That's when depression sets in. That's when people turn to drugs, and then that becomes a cycle. It becomes really hard to get out of here. So the fact that we have people who are able-bodied, willingly wanting to work and have the skills to actually advance along the corporate path and yet not be able to afford just the absolute basics of life is honestly shameful for our economy. Let me say that. We're a country where that should not be the case. And the fact that we're letting it happen, letting it metastasize here in California, there's a big issue with homelessness where the institutions that have risen up around it, titularly to represent the interests of the unhoused. Michael Schellenberger has done a lot of exposés on this, where they're profiting off of the problem, and so the institutions who are tasked with solving it don't really have an economic incentive to solve it, right? So there's just an awful lot of malinvestment and malincentive that we have to find ways to do away with to start doing this better. I wholly believe we can, but it's going to take a lot of reform, and the current status quo is probably going to fight that pretty hard.
And then finally here, I want to just kind of bring out this article that was on CBS News. Shoplifting is on the rise, even as reports of other types of crime fall. And, in this article, it says that shoplifting rose 24% in the first half of the year, while every other type of crime dropped, according to the study, which analyzed crime statistics in 23 cities. The data shows shoplifting is up across the country, reflecting what retailers have described as a growing problem. And I know last year, I think it was in, I don't remember, July maybe, September, right here. For example, Target said it was closing 9 stores because of rising theft, was jeopardizing workers and customers. And I think this is just, Adam, it's just, it just goes to show that we need to really come together, right? I think that if I had one thing I could wrap around, this show tonight is we started off talking about this divide, this division, and pull up the poll one more time, Joe. And I think that I think that I'd like to see everybody get on board with is, and one of the lowest they say here, it's kind of surprising that the biggest crisis in America today is, overall cost of living and corruption. But in some ways, one may say that the biggest crisis in America is division, because we're meant to do things together. And I think if I had to say that one of the biggest things that corruption, because yes, corruption is a pretty big thing in probably in every country in the world, but the corruption is what's causing us to divide, because they know that that is the only way that can prevent us from advancing and succeeding, is that we must be divided. And I guess my challenge and my encouragement is that we need to start looking around at ways that we can help each other out, help one another, and, pitch in like we used to back when, as my grandmother used to say, when Shep was a pup, right? So, I think that's where I want to leave people.
Remember at the beginning, I said, I remain optimistic in the long run. And I think in many cases, the solutions lie in the past, is going back and adopting the values that we had in previous generations. I think that's exactly what you're saying here, Todd.
Yep. We're right on the same page. Well, look, my friend, it's always a pleasure. We could just go on and on and on. And Adam, man, thanks so much for coming on. I know my audience appreciates you. And we're going to just pull up, if you go down to the show notes, we have Adam's YouTube channel, his Substack, his X, I think we have his website on there. We've got it. So check him out.
You're super kind. Yeah, just go to thoughtfulmoney.com, folks, and you'll find links to all the resources Todd mentioned there.
There you go.
Yeah. But thank you. And look, as I said, it's always such a joy to come and talk with you, Todd. I could do it forever. Anytime you ask, I will certainly come, as long as your audience still wants to hear anything I have to say. And again, I do want to reiterate, your audience you've cultivated just a great community of both, I think, critically minded people, which I do think is sort of like that's going to be one of the things that determines who comes out on the right side of what's ahead here. If you're one of the people that, doesn't just put your head in the ground, just wants to live on hope and be able to ignore, facts and figures. Instead, if you're somebody who really wants to try to figure out what's going on and then say, okay, it's helpful, but information by itself doesn't have much use. What am I going to do in response to that information? I think that's going to be really what determines who does well and who doesn't. And I think you've cultivated really well this audience of critical thinkers who also just happen to be really nice people too. So thank you. It's a privilege to be invited on here.
Thanks, Adam. And, and I will say that the nice thing about both of our channels is that we let both sides, or no matter what they believe on the issues that we talk about, we let them vet it out and air it out in the comments. And we love those comments. Keep the comments coming, because that's part of unity. I mean, as long as, look, my job is not to divide. My job is to unify. My job is, and that's not even my job, it's just my want, is to bring people together. And even if that means that you disagree with what I'm saying or what Adam says, we allow it here. It is a platform that your voice is important. We don't shut it down. And, we appreciate you guys. We love you. We thank you so much for spending your Tuesday nights and anytime that you're watching our shows. We value your time, and just know that you have a choice. One of the biggest compliments that you can do for us here, like Adam said, to help build the community that we have, is to share it with your family and friends. I think that if we do that, we continue to grow this amazing community that many have come to value. And if you like the show tonight, you can hit that thumbs up. It'll let Adam and I know that you did. And please show him some love, visit his channels, and we'll see you next time.
I was going to say that if you're watching this and you haven't yet subscribed to Sachs Realty, please just take a second and click that subscribe button, as well as that little bell icon right next to it. Anything that I can do to lend wind to your sales, Todd, or your communities here, please just say the word.
Thank you so much. Likewise.
All right.